currently happening now. It's been an interesting week from both the political and legal landscape. Now let's talk about the latest developments. Yesterday, Zuma filed papers at the Constitutional Court applying for the rescinding of the recent judgment. What's your reaction to this, especially after we know that the former president refused to make representations at the Constitutional Court twice after being afforded a chance to do so?
Good afternoon, Unati, and to the viewers. I think it was quite a heavy week for us, both for the political ruling party, for the judicial system, and of course for ordinary South Africans to take in what has been quite a lot of important but very, very taxing issues in terms of where our political landscape is, what the state of our democracy is, and what the fate of the nation is. I think in terms of kind of providing an overview of the events in the past several days, it's quite important for us to realize that this is by no means something that can just be looked at in a very trivial manner. I think the challenge for us is to understand the intensity of the decision of the Constitutional Court on Tuesday with regard to former President Jacob Zuma and finding him in contempt of the summons and in contempt of court. Now, what does, and then of course on Thursday, let me not forget, on Thursday, you had another interesting decision made in terms of the Public Protector's report with regard to the CR17 campaign, finding that the High Court's decision is upheld, that the Public Protector had essentially, I think, overreached on that occasion, but nevertheless also telling us that something internal, in terms of internal party funding with regard to the Amabungani issue, that it goes back to the High Court to be ventilated, to be considered, and that's where President Ramaphosa has to pay with cost. I think these are very important developments in terms of how you look at the litany of issues that have emerged around not just state capture in itself, but also what is happening within the broader context of the financial architecture of our country when it comes to democracy, when it comes to political party funding, when it comes to the issues of tender irregularities and corruption and so forth. I think the decision made by the Constitutional Court in itself is not just about what we're seeing now. It is about the fact that there's a lot more that needs to be unfolded and needs to be interrogated and discussed with regard to the way in which the financial architecture of our democracy is structured, but also what does this mean when you end up in a situation like we're seeing right now in South Africa, where the intention is that the Constitutional Court has to be part of the separation of powers, but its decision as the highest apex court of the land is being challenged by the court decision, by the application made yesterday by Mr. Jacob Zuma and his legal team. I find it to be quite interesting because the challenge here is it about the fact that there has been certain issues with regard to the judicial system, or is it about the fact that we just don't like what has come out? We just don't think that the decision that the Concord made is the right decision because we don't agree with it. And that's something that we need to be very careful of, because it sends out the kind of signals that suggest that the rule of law can be put into this kind of test, where it's not been tested for the question of the legal rational actor model or the legal rational process, but it's being tested for all other reasons in terms of the fact that we feel that this does not necessarily fit within our context or fit within our mandate of how we see things. And I think that is what's very important for us to think about. Whether or not the decision or the application made yesterday will find traction in the Concord. I mean, the Concord is not meeting until Monday. So, in that context, we'll have to see what they ventilate there, what they see there, what they essentially decide in terms of deciding whether they're going to go forward with this application. You also got the Zondo Commission or the State Capture Commission that's also going to lodge papers in response to this new application made and challenging the decision by Mr. Zuma to be imprisoned and to rescind the decision. And of course, there's the High Court question as well, because there's another application that the Pietermaritzburg High Court asking for the stay with regard to the arrest. So I think all of this tends to come to a point in the context of what it is that we actually, where is this all going? I mean, if we're challenging what is essentially a legal issue, but in the way that it's being challenged, I think is very, very important for us to think about it in the context of what does this mean for our democracy, but what does it mean for the rule of law? And more importantly, if this is the kind of impact and consequence we're going to see, then I think we're entering to uncharted territory at the moment.
And Sanusha, I think what was coming out very prevalently in the judgment that was, written by Justice Sisi Khampepe is the litigant himself. She was very pained, to say that this is not just any ordinary citizen. This is the former head of state who had little to no regard to the law. And that was probably one of the most fundamental things that came out of that. And if we have to look at the conduct in which he has displayed himself, not going to represent himself in the Constitutional Court and having statements, in the public arena. That is also something I think that that judgment was trying to point out, the lack of responsibility and accountability from his end.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very hard-hitting judgment that was read out by the acting Chief Justice, Khampepe. It was quite it was quite scathing on Mr. Zuma's character, and in the context of how he was betrayed and what the responsibilities he has to basically undertake as an individual who held the office of the President of the Republic and taken the oath twice in that office in terms of the mandate, and the way he needed to conduct his behavior with regard to that office. But I think what's also interesting is that immediately after that judgment, we saw tweets come out from family members of Mr. Jacob Zuma saying that they, indicating, if not coming out explicitly and saying, but indicating that they would respect the decision. And then suddenly, well, not suddenly, I think these were all kinds of the ways in which the tactics have been evolving over the last couple of days. Then we see these tweets take on a different tone. We see the statement by the Jacob Zuma Foundation. We see the photos being tweeted on different social media platforms about sitting and Jacob Zuma and his daughter sitting and looking at putting together the last minute attempt to have this whole this judgment rescinded. But I think it also tells us how much is this the kind of landscape around this and the kind of context around this decision of the Constitutional Court is being interpreted. I think for me the challenge is really around how do you interpret what the Constitutional Court said, because it seems to me that what that judgment was saying was very, 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 very important in terms of what is the state of the nation and what is the role of political leaders in our state of the nation and in the consolidation of democracy. And I think that in itself is where a lot of issues are kind of getting caught in a translation warp, in a sense that they lost in translation in terms of which parts of the judgment you like and which parts of the judgment you don't like, which parts of the whole thing that you think fits your kind of understanding of what that judgment was all about, and which parts you feel I can dismiss and I can continue going on this road. I mean, just to be honest with you, there's a lot of interesting chatter on Twitter, a lot of interesting spaces that are being occupied on Twitter, people who are coming out and in different ways, either lending support or saying that I don't support, and it causes different dynamics as well. So it's not just in terms of what we're seeing as the optics outside Nkandla, but also on the optics on social media.
Talking about Nkandla, I don't know if you were listening to one of my colleagues, and he said that even though this case, especially in the latest submission to the Court by the former president, even though it will be heard likely, next Tuesday, the bottom line is that there is this deadline of tomorrow. Now, we know that the former president has no choice but to abide by the warrant of committal issued by the Court on the 30th of June to the Westville Correctional Center, now we're told. Do you think the former president will hand himself over tomorrow?
It's difficult to say. I think, on Tuesday, and then the reaction by the Jacob Zuma family, etc., kind of gave us the indication that there was going to be some level of abiding by this decision. We come today and we are thrown in the deep end. We're uncertain. We hear different views. We hear different interpretations. We hear conflicting views around whether or not Mr. Jacob Zuma would actually present himself to the police station tomorrow. We do know, however, that there's going, there was a report, I don't know how far it's true, but he's going to address, I think your reporter said he's going to address the people outside Nkandla or act from his residence tomorrow. I think that's going to be interesting to see what tone comes out of that. Whether he presents himself to the police station or whether he brings it to a point where he kind of pushes the envelope for the police commissioner to come, the minister of police to come in and say, Mr. Zuma, there's this statement of committal that has been put forward by the Justice Kampepe. This is what she says. We have to take you in because until such time that this affidavit that you've now submitted to the Constitutional Court is heard, the ruling of the Constitutional Court is still relevant. It still applies. I'm not sure whether it's about also giving it to the last minute, the last hour, and seeing what unfolds outside in terms of what the supporters are saying, that, if it comes to that, there'll be different reactions, different behavior, different impacts, and of course, what's going to happen is also something that's going to be very important. Whether the provincial leadership in the province is able to have some kind of breakthrough and whatever the discussion and negotiation is now, and they come back and report to the NEC, with the NEC that's there, as well as then, as we were told, there may be a PEC. I think it's very vital in terms of what comes out of this discussion and whether they are able to convince Mr. Zuma that he has to essentially abide by this ruling until such time the Constitutional Court hears his application to have the decision rescinded.
Sanusha Naidu, thank you so much for your analysis and your time this afternoon. We do appreciate it. Thank you so much. All right, that was Sanusha Naidu, political analyst. All right, we'll have more of your top stories and go back to Nkandla as soon as we come back. Stay with us.